wait a couple. All right, can you please share the slides then? All right. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our San Francisco Bay Area Coalition's training series. I am Berta McDonald, and I'm on the steering committee of the Bay Area Coalition. And today marks the second anniversary of the Dobbs decision, and we are all quite aware that women's health is on the ballot this year. So we are thrilled that you're here for this great communicating with voters on abortion, bridging the gap training with Jillian McLeod-Tariff, Organizing and Training Manager for Planned Parenthood Maine Action. I'd like to quickly thank my BAC partner, Susan Boley, as well as Leanne Townsend and Marty Cernwag for their help on this event. Next slide, please. But first, a few housekeeping items to make sure we stay on schedule and everybody can hear. We'll keep you muted until you've been recognized. And for questions and comments, please use the chat function. We'll be monitoring the chat and we'll do our best to answer questions there or at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Before we start, a little bit about the Bay Area Coalition. We are a group of now almost 50 grassroots organizations and Democratic County committees who got together to support each other and in our work in organizing phone banks and canvassing efforts and voter registration drives. So to learn more about us, so please make sure you, there's a link to our website will be in chat. So check it out. And next slide. And we invite you to take action with us. This is a tough electoral year, and we want to make sure we reach every voter. We are holding phone banks every Wednesday and Saturdays. Our focus is on the California Central Valley, Arizona, Nevada, and we are a DNC hub for the Biden campaign. Our phone banks also include a Spanish language option. So if you're a Spanish speaker or no Spanish speakers, we need you. And we also have many canvassing and voter registration opportunities available in the Central Valley's congressional districts 22, 13 throughout the electoral season. And if you scan the QR code on the slide there, it will cue you to all of our events, or you can click the link in chat. Next slide, please. And we have more trainings lined up for you. For those wanting to test the canvassing waters, we offer a training every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. and where you can learn all about the tools we use to canvass and what it takes to canvass. And next month on Thursday, July 18, we will offer similar training for those new to phone banking or for volunteers who haven't phone banked in a while and may need a little refresher. We welcome Kathy Walsh. She's a therapist and seasoned trainer who will guide us through her active listening workshop. Listening is a powerful tool that we can use to make strong connections with voters, and we hope you can join us for this training on July 11th. And then I invite you to use our Bay Area Coalition messaging library. This is a super helpful tool that we use when talking to voters based on guiding principles behind the focus group tested values villains vision, the 3V's messaging framework developed by Anat Shankar-Osoria. And to learn how to make the most of this amazing library while developing useful messaging skills, Natalie Burdick of Sister District and Swing Left will offer the messaging that wins hearts and minds training on July 22nd. And finally, next slide. As part of our speaker series, we are excited to host political analyst and Substack Hopium Chronicles author Simon Rosenberg on July 25th, and Pod Save America's Dan Pfeiffer, author of Substack's Message Box, on August 12th. So to sign up for all of these events, please see the link in chat or go to our website. Or next slide, please. Or you can scan the QR here too. That will take us everywhere to all of our events. Next slide, please. And now I'd like to welcome Jillian McLeod-Tariff of Planned Parenthood New England. She is an experienced reproductive rights leader organizer who also trains with the Deep Canvassing Institute using their voter connection tools. And she manages a year-round abortion stigma reduction deep canvassing program, supervising organizers and organizations to promote deep canvassing trainings and collaborating with diverse teams on projects to protect and expand reproductive health access in Maine and around the country. Her activist works include speaking at marches, rallies, organizing large-scale public events, and participating in lobby days in DC. Jillian lives in beautiful Maine, and we are so grateful for having her here to share this training with us. So welcome, Jillian. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Berta. Thanks, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. I wish that we were here together on a happier anniversary, but today is the second anniversary of Dobbs and the second anniversary of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And it's been a rough 2 years, I'm not gonna lie. There's been a lot going on, but I want to tell you about this photo on the screen. So that's my mom in the black t-shirt, that's me in the green dress. And her sign is correct. She says, "My beautiful daughter is here because I had an abortion." My mom's actually had 2 abortions, and she's given me permission to share her story with you all today. I really truly believe this, that I wouldn't be here with you all if it wasn't for my mom's abortions that she had before I came along. And so that's why this issue is so personal to me. And I hope that by the end of tonight, we're all able to articulate our personal connections to this topic of abortion, because that is such a key element of being able to be a really effective activist here. So I would love to learn a little bit more about you all. So folks, please put in the chat, because there is such a good group of folks here with us tonight. I don't think we'd have time to go around one by one, but please put in the chat your names, your pronouns if you would like, where you are from, and then just 1 or 2 words about what are you hoping to learn through this training. I want to know who's here and what y'all are hoping to learn. So let me know in the chat. We've got Ellen from Portland, Oregon. Ellen, I was just in Portland a couple months ago. It was lovely. Had a beautiful time. We've got Deborah, we've got Jan and Bob and Victoria. What's my mom's name? Very nice. Hi, Meg. Hi, Janice. Hi, Susan. Hi, Brody. All right, keep those coming in. I want to hear from everybody, but let's keep moving for time. So before we get started, we want to go over just a couple of ground rules, because during this training together, folks might be sharing some personal stories about abortion. I might share a story. People are going to get vulnerable. And so I'd like us to all agree on these community norms for our time together. While we are all on Zoom, Berta mentioned this earlier, but please mute yourself. That'll help us stay on task. Vegas rules. So this means that what's said here stays here, but what is learned here should leave with you. We do not share personal details outside this space unless you have permission, but the lessons that you learn here should be spread far and wide. No experts here. So that means all of us, including me, are on a lifelong journey of learning. So you do not need to be an expert to be in this space or to use the tools that we're going to talk about today. If anyone ever uses jargon that you don't understand, you can let us know right away in the chat, and we'll make sure to explain it. We want everyone to be on the same page. So if there's anything unfamiliar, please go ahead and ask. You can ask questions throughout in the chat. However, we've got a lot to get to. So what we probably are going to end up doing is collecting those questions as we go, and then we will come back to them at the end of the night. Mary said, what are Vegas rules? That means what's said here stays here, and what's learned here leaves here. So basically don't share personal details of other people's stories. There are no tolerance for bad faith interruptions. We believe everybody who is here has good intentions and supports abortion rights. However, we know that there's also folks in the world who strongly disagree with us. And so the team who is hosting us today has a lot of plans in place, a lot of safety measures, but just know that if somebody interrupts us, we have a plan for that, and we'll keep going because this work is too important for anybody to stop us. So here's what to expect over our time together. We just did our welcome and introductions. Check. We're going to do a little abortion 101 next. Then we'll learn how to address some stigma. We'll learn how to talk about abortion, about the importance of personal stories and values, non-judgmental listening, and then we'll have a time to look at an example of a really effective conversation. And then I'll turn it back over to our hosts so that they can share next steps with you. So let's get into it. So to start off, we're going to go over some important knowledge about abortion. I also like to mention at the beginning of these things, if it sounds like I'm reading off of notes, I am, because I want to make sure that we stay on top of things and that we get to all of our material. Anyways, so to reduce stigma and clear up some misinformation and some myths, you will need to understand abortion as both a medical procedure and as a political issue. Although the word abortion can conjure some different feelings and images for people, it's important to first understand what an abortion actually is. There's a lot of misinformation about abortion, and we want to clear up some myths. This is the first and possibly the most critical step in reducing abortion stigma with the people we talk to, but also within ourselves. Abortion is a medical procedure which results in the termination of a pregnancy. There are many ways that people have terminated pregnancies throughout history and today. The two most common kinds of abortions today are procedural abortions and medication abortions. In a procedural abortion, sometimes called an in-office abortion, it is a medical procedure performed in a health center. Mostly, they take about 5 to 10 minutes. And in this procedure, there are instruments used to manually empty the contents of the uterus. A medication abortion, which is sometimes called the abortion pill, is 2 medications taken to end a pregnancy. In this procedure, the first medication, called mifepristone, blocks progesterone, which causes the body to chemically end the pregnancy. So you might have heard about mifepristone in the news recently because of a lawsuit which originated in Texas, which alleged that the FDA should not have approved this medication for general usage and for abortion usage in the 90s. Mifepristone has been used by millions of people in the past few decades since its approval. We are so grateful that SCOTUS ruled in favor of maintaining mifepristone access. It's clear that the lawsuit was an attempt to limit abortion access despite the mountains of evidence of this drug's safety. And we recommend checking out Guttmacher's website resource for more information about this case. And I believe that, yeah, we shared a link in the chat from Berta that you can check out that website to learn more about it. So the second drug taken in a medication abortion is called misoprostol, and it is taken 6 to 48 hours later, and it causes the uterus to contract and empty the contents of the uterus. There are many factors which impact the decision to choose one method of abortion over the others, like a person's comfort level in medical settings, desire to self-manage at home, or the duration of the pregnancy. Everyone's experience is different and valid. Abortions, even in-office abortions, even procedural abortions, are not surgical procedures. There are no incisions, and often patients stay awake during the procedure. Excuse me, sorry. In fact, the biggest threat to patient safety is in places where accessing abortion may expose patients to unjust legal threats. So let's take a look at the next slide. Before we really get into things here, it's important to note that people of all genders have abortions. Some trans and non-binary and intersex people have uteruses and they can get pregnant, which means that they can have abortions. This beautiful quote that we see on the screen here comes from an excellent resource called Shout Your Abortion. So in this training, we use gender neutral language to include these experiences. We also use the word women, and this is because the majority of abortion research and data has been conducted with cisgender women. While talking to voters about abortion, we recommend meeting voters where they're at. Some voters might not be ready to talk about abortion as a trans-inclusive issue, so you may opt to use the word women. Ultimately, in the same way that we use non-judgmental language around abortion to reduce stigma and shame, we must do the same to include trans folks who already face obstacles in seeking care. If using gender-neutral language is new for you, that is okay. It truly, all it takes is practice. We've also got some links in the chat if you would like to read more about this concept. So, abortion stigma can be perpetuated when we have a vague, inaccurate picture in our mind of what type of person gets abortions. So here's some statistics about who has abortions that we found useful when we're doing our deep canvassing work. Oh, yeah. Oh. Can y'all still hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. So 1 in 4 women will have an abortion before the age of 45. I don't know about y'all. I know more than 4 women. I know lots of people who have had abortions. 85% of patients are in their 20s and 30s. Most voters think that patients are in their teens, when in reality, only about 10% of abortion patients are teenagers. This one, I think, was really surprising to me when I first read it. About half of the abortion patients in the United States reported that they had used a contraceptive method in the month that they became pregnant. So often when you're talking about abortion, you'll hear people say, well, why don't they just use birth control? Why don't they prevent it in the first place? Well, most of them tried to, and it failed. That's how it works sometimes. There's not a ton of data about trans and gender expansive people who have abortions, but we do know that 1 in 5 trans and gender expansive patients consider themselves to be at risk of getting pregnant at a time when they did not want to be. So again, this is why it's very important to include people of all genders in our conversations about abortion. And lastly, accompanied by this beautiful quote, we know that about 60% of women who have an abortion already have 1 child. So if we think about what that means, people are making the decision to have an abortion out of love and protection for the families that they already have. So you have probably heard the term reproductive justice. This term has very specific definitions, and it's important to understand that this is not just a catch-all term. The reproductive justice framework was developed at the Black Women's Caucus in 1994 to address the specific intersections of Black, Indigenous, and POC experiences that were left unaddressed by white feminists. Reproductive justice centers women's rights within a human rights framework by emphasizing that each person's ability to live out their lives is uniquely shaped by social injustices, including lack of education, poverty, racism, sexism, transphobia, and ableism, among others. Black-led reproductive justice organizations such as Sister Song state that reproductive justice is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have children, to not have children, and to parent the children that we do have in safe and sustainable communities. So if you imagine a parent who has a child who's going to an American public school, who has to worry about gun violence when they send their child to that school, that's an example of somebody not being able to raise their child in a safe and sustainable community. So that's just a small example of a million examples I could give of how these issues are completely intersectional and completely representative of reproductive justice. So the emphasis here is on the complete well-being of humans. It takes into consideration intersecting oppressions, power systems, and it really centers us on the people that are most impacted. So things like food justice, gun violence, like I mentioned, immigration, housing, racial justice, climate justice, global peace, and more are all reproductive justice issues. The focus on legal abortion rights does not fully account for people on the margins who are not protected by the law in the same way that white middle-class people have been historically. We can lean on the values of the reproductive justice movement without co-opting the work of Black women, and we can make sure that we specifically advocate for policies that disproportionately affect BIPOC communities. So let's learn about how to talk about abortion. So when talking about abortion, language is very important. It's important to be considerate about the words and the phrases that we use, because how we talk about a topic shapes our collective imagination about it. So I've got a few language adjustment suggestions here on the page that can help us destigmatize abortion. So I am positive that we have all heard the phrase choice, as in I support a person's right to choose. Instead of using the word choice, we recommend consider using the word decision. There's a lot of factors in decision-making around abortion that make it so that people don't actually have a choice. They make a decision based on a lot of factors like financial barriers, family support, the needs of their existing children, and of course, they are thinking about their dreams for the future. I mentioned earlier that my mom has had 2 abortions. She told me about her first one where her boyfriend was older than her at the time, lived in a different state, and basically told her, "You're never going to see me again unless you have this abortion." She probably would have made the same decision in the end, but that's not really a choice, right? That's a decision based on the information that she had at the time. So we know that sometimes the word abortion can feel inflammatory or controversial to say out loud, but we want to try saying the word abortion instead of terminate a pregnancy as a means of challenging that stigma. When we describe someone's abortion as heartbreaking, tragic, or difficult, it's possible that we could be inserting emotions onto somebody else's experience that they didn't actually feel themselves. And then this one, we hear this one a lot from politicians, sometimes in the media. If we describe an abortion as elective, this implies that the procedure was avoidable or not necessary. So let's be clear, all abortions are necessary. Switching up the words and phrases that we use every day, it can be a little tricky sometimes, especially if we've been using a certain word our whole life. I don't want you to walk away from this slide feeling like you have to be the language perfectionist of the year. These are just some things to consider and some things that you can practice to move us towards a world where abortion is destigmatized. And you know, as I was actually preparing for this presentation today, I had to adjust a few words based on some updated guidance from my peers. And a lot of these language adjustments that we see actually come from the reproductive justice movement that we just learned about. So again, if you make a mistake, it is okay. you're still a good abortion advocate. The point here is to be thoughtful and considerate when you're choosing your words. We like to include the specific topic of later abortion when we're talking about these things because this is what the anti-abortion movement often recenters discussions on. And so we are going to talk about that a little bit. There's a lot of perspectives on what qualifies as a later abortion. In some contexts, especially legislatively, different areas, the term used to refer to abortions that occur after 20 weeks. But, in different areas, different contexts, it could be used to refer to a range of gestational durations. Some people have had a D&C, which stands for dilation and curettage, which is a medical procedure to remove the contents of the uterus when medically necessary. This procedure can also be used for other conditions. And so, though some don't consider this to be an abortion, for some people, this feels related to the topic of later abortion because it's a similar procedure. So you might have heard the phrase late-term abortion. This phrase was coined by the anti-abortion movement, and it carries really heavy stigma and misinformation. So instead of saying late-term abortion, you want to try using the phrase later abortion, abortions throughout pregnancy, or abortions that occur later in pregnancy, or honestly, you can just say the word abortion. When talking about later abortions, folks will often cite the fact that they happen rarely. And we do say, there are trusted statistics from trusted sources about the frequency of later abortions. For example, we know that fewer than 1% of abortions happen after 21 weeks, and 58% wish their abortion could have been earlier. And those statistics come from Guttmacher. However, some later abortions can be categorized as miscarriages by providers. So it is absolutely possible that later abortions are more common than we think. However, no matter the frequency of how often they happen, point here is that people deserve to get the care that they need on their timeline without judgment and without legal intervention. So, why do folks often end up having later abortions? Research finds that there are two common pathways through which people find themselves seeking abortions later in pregnancy. The first pathway is that the patient finds out new information that changed the course of their pregnancy. They might learn that there is a poor fetal diagnosis, that the fetus is no longer viable, or that there is a newly discovered threat to the health or life of the pregnant person. Some people might not discover that they're pregnant until after the first trimester, sometimes even the second. And there also might be a sudden severe life event or significant change in circumstances. Or the patient might have faced barriers when trying to receive care earlier. So some of those barriers could include legal restrictions, a lack of insurance coverage, or required parental consent for minors. There might also be difficulty traveling to a provider if you live far away from them, paying for the procedure, getting time off from work, finding childcare for those children that they already have. They might have interacted with what is called a crisis pregnancy center, or is now sometimes known as an anti-abortion center. And these are fake clinics that they say that they exist to provide free reproductive health care like ultrasounds, but their actual goal is to prevent people from having abortions or using birth control. And they'll do this really tricky thing while they use like branding and fonts and logos that are similar to nearby abortion clinics. They lure people in with like free ultrasounds and free diapers. And then you get in there, they're usually funded by religious organizations. They don't have any actual licensed doctors working there. And in the end, they're really sneaky and tricking you into not having an abortion. Another way that somebody might have faced a barrier earlier is that their family or their partner might have tried to block them from getting an abortion. It's a really great resource out there. It is called whonotwhen.com. And that resource will have more information about later abortion and some really great stories as well. All right, let's talk about it. Abortion and faith. We want to review some facts related to abortion in communities of faith, because this is one of the biggest concerns that people have when they are engaging in a conversation with a stranger, with a voter whose religious background is different than their own. This is because the religious right has created this inaccurate perception that faith and abortion are morally opposed. But it is important to understand that even within faith traditions, there are many differing views. For example, Pew reports that 48% of Catholics believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases, while 47% believe the opposite. There's a few facts that we think that you should know. Most Americans of faith support abortion rights. 62% of abortion patients report religious affiliation. Not all faith traditions are anti-abortion. Some even require abortion in certain circumstances, such as Judaism. People of faith might face threats, or they might feel unsafe speaking up in support of abortion in their religious communities. And that is why it is so important that we reclaim this narrative around faith and abortion. We have to make it safe so that people of faith can come out in support of abortion in their religious communities, because we cannot cede the moral high ground to groups who try to use their religious views as justification for political policies that brutalize marginalized communities. And then lastly, you'll see this on screen. In Maine, at least, we have some volunteer chaplains who come in as faith counselors for folks who have just had abortions. It's really beautiful stuff. So what do you say when you're in a conversation about abortion and faith? Here's some concrete examples on how to launch a conversation related to faith and abortion. Remember that you should always stick to what is authentic and comfortable for you. So if you do identify as a person of faith, or if you come from that background, you can say, as a person of faith, here is my understanding. You could also say the Bible or another religious text is such a valuable resource for so many people. For me, the Bible also reaffirms our moral freedom to make tough decisions. If you are not a person of faith, you could talk about the understanding that you've gained from talking with people you know who are religious. You could connect your understanding of some core values of religion, or you could simply share how you came to your own perspective, right? If for them, their faith is how they came to their perspective, for you, the stories that you've heard have led you to yours. There's all kinds of things that you can say. So just want to give some content warning that this slide talks a little bit about medical racism. Reproductive health access today has been historically shaped by classism and racism. Healthcare, education, employment, incarceration, law, and housing all affect when and how someone receives reproductive health care. So to ensure that everyone is able to make parenting and pregnancy decisions that are best for them, we must dismantle systemic racism alongside advocating for abortion access. There is a well-documented history of racism in sexual and reproductive health care since the beginning of gynecology till today. Planned Parenthood has our place in this narrative too, as Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger had involvement in the eugenics movement over a century ago. Sanger disregarded the direct harm that the eugenics movement had on Black and BIPOC communities and instead focused on the benefits of birth control. So we recognize that her achievements are incredibly important, and we also recognize that she was a flawed historical figure. We cannot turn a blind eye to this history, nor can we ignore how it has shaped Planned Parenthood today. The abortion stigma that we see today is rooted in racist and classist ideas of who should or should not be raising a family. This is also true for anti-abortion extremists. It's also true for everyday voters and supporters like ourselves. When we're canvassing, we often hear voters conflating abortion with poverty and poverty with race and crime. They also invoke ideas like population control, sexual promiscuity, irresponsibility, and laziness as racist dog whistles for reasons that abortion access is needed in urban areas. But let's be clear that these ideas are completely unacceptable, and this is part of why we have to talk about racism when we talk about abortion stigma. So now that we're more familiar with facts about abortion, let's start to talk about abortion in the political sphere. Abortion is a wedge issue. We're not talking about a delicious salad with blue cheese dressing. We're not talking about a lemon wedge or a cute shoe. Wedge issues like immigration, trans non-discrimination, gun safety, these are issues that are often controversial and divisive in nature. They've been used by politicians to drive wedges between groups of folks who would otherwise be united in agreement, but because of this one issue, they're driven apart. And that helps them, these conservatives, get elected. Abortion was purposefully politicized in the 70s and 80s as a strategy to galvanize voters and win votes for Republicans. Anti-abortion activists knew that anti-Black racism was becoming a less effective wedge issue, though you could say that that trend has reversed lately, and that white birth rates were declining. And they knew they needed a new platform that would capture the loyalty of the growing religious right, while also encouraging white voters to grow their families to maintain a political majority. The division that we see today around this issue is on purpose, but it does not have to be that way. We've been led to believe that voter attitudes on abortion are entrenched and will never change, but that is not true, because 7 in 10 Americans now support access to safe and legal abortion. So let me be super clear with y'all. Abortion is not controversial. Abortion rights are very, very popular. Since the protections of Roe fell 2 years ago, we've seen many states enact extreme abortion restrictions or outright bans on abortion. Please note that abortion legality is rapidly changing. It seems every day, every week. And so I highly recommend researching the abortion laws wherever you may be. So on the screen, we can see a map of the United States with states color-coded to indicate their level of protection or restrictions in their abortion laws. So we can take a look here at this map. We also have an interactive version on the Guttmacher website, which we can take a look at. And just look here at this band of deep orange. And I want you to imagine that you are a disenfranchised person living down here in Louisiana and you need an abortion. Just look at how far you're going to have to travel to get that care that you need. And now imagine that you've got kids. Now imagine that your transportation is compromised, that you live on a low income and can barely make your rent. There's a lot of factors at play here, let alone the cost of the abortion itself, right? So it's important to note that people can receive abortion pills in the mail in all 50 states. There's resources out there that I encourage you to research. But let's take a look here. Let's take a look at California, because it's where our hosts are located. So very protective laws in California, and you can see some examples of those protections right over here. California's state constitution protects abortion rights. Go California. State Medicaid funds cover abortion. Private health insurance plans are also required to cover abortions. Not just doctors can perform abortions, any qualified healthcare professional. There is a state fund. So I'm showing you this list to show that these are the types of policies that we need to be fighting for. Of course, we need to fight against abortion bans and restrictions. We can also fight for proactive policies to protect access no matter where you are. So even if you're in an abortion-friendly state like Maine or California, there is still a lot that you can be fighting for. So make sure that whoever you're voting for is somebody who is vocally and unequivocally supporting abortion rights. Abortion restrictions happen mostly at the state level, but anti-abortion politicians have publicly endorsed the idea of bans on a municipal level in our towns and cities and on a national federal level. Federal abortion ban is on the table this November. So this is why, again, we have to remain vigilant for attacks at every level of government. Our opponents will stop at nothing to eliminate access completely. So we must show up with the same level of commitment to protecting access. So why is abortion so hard to talk about? Why does getting an abortion often feel illicit and shameful? Why don't we hear about the abortion experiences of our parents and our siblings and our friends? Why are abortion providers targets of violence and marginalized within the medical community? Why is there an extreme level of criminalization and legal scrutiny around abortion worldwide? And why does it feel like securing our reproductive rights is a never-ending uphill battle? The answer is stigma. Abortion stigma can be defined as a shared belief that having an abortion is morally wrong and socially unacceptable. Internal and external stigmas are major barriers to accessing adequate reproductive health care services, and it contributes to myths and misperceptions about abortion in our society. These stigmas allow restrictive and punitive laws across to be enacted in states across the country, like we have just learned about. So some examples of abortion stigma. When a person who has had an abortion is stereotyped as selfish or immoral. When politicians feel empowered to limit access to abortion and discriminate against providers. When low-income families are shamed for not having an abortion, that counts as abortion stigma. Or when someone who has had an abortion feels guilty for not feeling guilty about having an abortion. Reducing abortion stigma is challenging, but we have found that by helping people to verbalize their stigma, work through the facts about abortion, and connect to their real-life experiences, many people truly will change their hearts and minds. Most people simply don't know the truth about abortion. We like to say people have opinions that are a mile wide and an inch deep. A lot of people have never had the opportunity to think critically on this subject. So before we can fight abortion stigma, we have to be comfortable talking about it and saying the word. So I am going to ask you to come off of mute for this one sweet moment together. If you can, if you can't, that's okay. Get those mute buttons. Oh, we can't. That's right. We disabled that option.
No.
I'm
Because
just gonna
nobody's
do
unmuted
that.
though.
I'm gonna have Berta and Susan. Y'all are gonna be my voices here. So on the count of three, and everybody at home, even though we can't hear you, we're gonna say the word abortion.
We
Ready?
allowed, yeah.
1, 2, 3. Abortion. Great. Okay, we're gonna try again. This time we're gonna say the word like we just saw the cat puke on the rug. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Abortion.
Okay, now we're gonna say it like we just won a surprise trip to our dream vacation destination. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Abortion! Okay, one more time. We're gonna say it like we are slipping into a warm bath after a long, hard day. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Abortion.
Beautiful work, everybody. I know it's kind of goofy and silly, but we do this again to normalize it and to show that people have all kinds of emotions about this topic. So just keep practicing and you will get better and better. So we have learned a lot about abortion together. Now we are going to talk about one of the most impactful ways to fight abortion stigma, which are interpersonal conversations. These tools can be used in a lot of different kinds of conversations. So at Planned Parenthood Main Action Fund, we've been having conversations with voters at their doors and on the phone for our 8-year ongoing, actually, this is our 9th year, ongoing deep canvassing project, which is called Bridging the Gap. You can also use these skills when you're talking with friends and family, even strangers, about any divisive topic. This doesn't just have to be when you're talking to voters. So the most important thing is that we do not shy away from talking about abortion. Changing hearts and minds can be hard, but it takes time and understanding. But it is essential, especially now. If we want to live in a world where access to safe and legal abortion is a reality for everyone, then we must find a way to talk to people who disagree with us. So there's 3 tactics that we're going to go over. We're going to talk about shared values, personal stories, and non-judgmental listening. So what is the goal of our conversations in the deep canvassing context and just interpersonally? Or maybe even when you're doing phone banking? There is a spectrum of supportiveness for abortion access. So you might meet folks who fall anywhere between 100% opposed to those who actively work to support abortion in their communities, like you all. It is not our goal to change someone from violently opposed to fully affirmative. Our goal is to meet people where they're at, listen actively, share our lived experiences, and make our case. And by doing these things, you can create a space for the voter to move forward on this spectrum. You might help someone who feels deeply uncomfortable even thinking about abortion feel a little bit more comfortable talking openly about it. Or you might help somebody who passively accepts that abortion is legal. You know, I don't love it, but it happens. You know, I think we've all heard those folks. We can help them understand that there is urgency in taking action to support. Every single conversation you have is going to be an incremental step towards increasing and protecting abortion access. So let's talk about shared values. I love this quote on the screen. We all have the same moral taste buds, yet different tastes in morality. So this means that everyone will identify with all of the moral values to some extent, but inevitably some values might be more relatable depending on the person and their circumstances. Everyone's values are inherently the same. They just vary in strength according to specific attitudes and opinions. So this inherent similarity is what we want to tap into when we're talking about abortion. We want to focus on what do we have in common rather than what drives us apart. By being aware of everybody's values and not just the ones that we're more in tune with, we should be able to find common ground with people of different opinions. So when you're talking to somebody about abortion, you want to try listening for the values that you have in common, even if your opinions are different. So for example, say you're talking to somebody who says that they are against abortion, but later on in that conversation, you learn that their sister has had an abortion and maybe, you know, they even brought her to that appointment. You learn that family is very, very important to them and they think that she did the right thing, but they're against abortion. So from that story, you have learned that the value of loyalty and family is key for this person. So now you can share that family and loyalty are also very important to you, and you can share how that value is why you support abortion. So I shared my mom's story at the beginning of this presentation with this person. I would say, you know, I'm so glad you were there to support your sister when she needed an abortion. My mom has actually had 2, and that is why, you know, my connection and my loyalty to my family is a big reason why I support abortion rights. So you can see that connection and that commonality starting right there. Or say the person that you're talking to shares that they are very, very concerned about the pain a fetus might feel during an abortion. From that, you have learned that the value of care and avoiding harm is really central in their opinions. So you can share that you also feel deep care for the people who need abortions, and you worry about the harm that can come to them if we deny someone the health care that they need. So I would love to share an example of a story, because the next tactic that we're going to be talking about is storytelling. So let me see. I want to make sure that I'm sharing my sound. So I'm actually going to stop sharing for just a tick. I'm going to go back in and we're going to listen to this fabulous abortion story together. So Berta, I can see you on my screen. Can you give me a thumbs up when you hear the volume on this video? Okay.
Hello, my name is Shira, and I'm passionate about reproductive rights because of my father. You see, my father was a general surgeon, a colonel in the Army, and chief of surgery at several base hospitals around the world. When he retired, he decided that he was going to continue putting his passions to work. As a supporter of reproductive justice, he said that anyone can donate money to organizations such as Planned Parenthood, but not everyone can donate surgical skills. So he decided to become a licensed abortion provider and provided abortion services until he became ill in 1998. My father was very proud to be an abortion provider and of his support for reproductive rights. Despite my father's vocal support for abortion access, I never thought that it would be my personal choice to make. In 2007, I had a very healthy and bright 8-year-old daughter. I had an extremely difficult pregnancy with her and was told by my doctor that the pregnancy would be risky. As an obese diabetic with a history of pregnancy challenges, it was not safe for me to have another child. When I became pregnant, I knew it was the right decision to terminate the pregnancy. I immediately made an appointment at a local clinic and was able to get an abortion within a few weeks. The care I received was amazing. Everyone I encountered was compassionate and kind with no judgment. I support Planned Parenthood to honor my dad's memory and because of my own personal experience. With this 49th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, we need to keep moving forward to make sure abortion is accessible to those who need it. I'm sharing my story to protect reproductive rights and help teach future generations the importance of fighting for reproductive justice for all.
Well, thank you to Shira for sharing that story with us and with the world. I think, if we think about how we felt while we were watching that video, we can just start to see the power of storytelling right away. So let's talk about personal stories as advocacy. When someone shares a personal story, it connects effectively if it causes us to feel something about the people in the story. We're going to react emotionally to a story based on our values, but different values can drive different reactions to the same story. So you can think about an abortion story you heard, maybe the one that we just listened to together. You want to think about who in that story do you most relate to? Do you relate more to the dad in the story? Maybe more to the person who got the abortion? And you can think about, why does that perspective resonate for you? It's possible to shift a voter's focus by telling the same story from a different perspective, one that is more relatable to them. So for example, if the person you're talking to, you think they would relate more to the dad in that story, maybe you can talk a little bit more about his experience and his perspective and some of the values that would drive him. So once you've engaged them in the story and they can see themselves in the situation, that's when you can really dig in. When we tell a personal story that resonates with someone's emotions, that is grounded in their values, we have the opportunity to reduce their stigma. Our job is to hold up a mirror for the voter so that they can see their own values by reacting emotionally to the stories that we share. And this allows them to see where they might be expressing a belief that isn't actually in line with their values. I think that I just raised my hand by putting my hand up like that. That's so funny.
Just saying it triggered it.
Yeah, it's so funny. But right, to get back to the presentation here. So, sometimes we'll hear things like the example that I just gave. I don't believe in abortion, but I supported my sister through one. And so by doing this storytelling work, you can kind of start to ease that person into a feeling of cognitive dissonance. You can start to help them understand where the contradictions might be between their values and their stories. So that's why this can be really, really powerful stuff. So we're going to go over how to develop our own stories. And here are the steps of our 4-part process. So first, we would encourage you to ask others questions to dig deep. Next, you want to find some time to think it over. I recommend writing it down as just a practice to start to solidify some of those details. I also recommend finding someone to practice sharing it with, because the more that you practice sharing stories, the easier it will get. So what kinds of stories have folks been sharing, and what can you start thinking about when developing your personal story? We know that everybody comes here with different backgrounds and motivations. So first of all, give yourself praise for being here and release yourself from the pressure of having the perfect story. Your perspective is unique and impactful, and we are right here alongside you when figuring out how to share in a conversation. And I even think that it is your unique perspective that makes you the perfect person to be doing this work. So you might choose to share a perspective from a personal experience with abortion that involves yourself or your family or your friends. You are not required to tell a story that you're not ready to tell. And I'm going to say that again because it's so important. You are not required to tell a story that you are not ready to tell. This is your choice, and you are the expert. Abortion stories can also be varied. They don't need to be about a bad experience. They don't even need to end in abortions. So some examples could be a story about someone who considered abortion but chose to give birth and placed the baby for adoption. A story about someone who used birth control to prevent pregnancy. A story about someone who had an unintended pregnancy or a pregnancy scare. Or you could share your story about learning about abortion and sex ed, or not learning about abortion and sex ed. Or you could just talk about your journey to abortion advocacy. What is it that brought you to this webinar tonight? That's your story. While not everyone has had an abortion, we guarantee you know someone who has, or you have heard someone's story. Again, because you are here, you have a story. Why is abortion access important to you as a person? What do you know about abortion or have learned about abortion that affected the way that you think about it? So these are some things to be thinking about, and I really recommend sitting down, thinking it over, write it down if you can, share it with somebody else, because that personal story is going to be a very powerful tool in your tool belt when having these conversations. The next element to these conversations is non-judgmental listening. It's so important that in our conversations, we create a space where voters understand that they will not be judged for having complicated feelings about abortion. You want to meet people where they are at and offer an opportunity to work through those feelings. Many people feel cognitive dissonance when they're thinking about abortion. That is, they say they're against it, but at their core, they actually understand why abortion access is important because of their real lived experiences and their deeply held values. Dissonance is uncomfortable to experience. To resolve it, something has to change. Either their opinions have to change or the truth about their lives has to change, and the truth cannot be changed. This is how voters will change their own minds, which is much more impactful than having someone tell you how to feel. You can create that rare space where someone can resolve their cognitive dissonance without being judged. So the first step in creating that space is recognizing your own internalized abortion stigma. We all grew up and we live in a society that stigmatizes abortion. Therefore, every single one of us, has some stigma deep inside of us. It's that little nagging feeling in your gut that wants to tell you that there is something wrong or inherently bad about abortion. You want to learn to recognize that feeling and root it out where you can. And just know that this is going to be a lifelong journey. I still have abortion stigma that I'm working through, and I do this work every day. Rooting out your own stigma can be uncomfortable, but it will make you a better advocate. And if we do not acknowledge it in ourselves, then we will perpetuate it in the world. This will help us be less judgmental in conversations. So when we share with voters how our positions have changed over time, they are more likely to feel safe changing theirs as well. Confessing that we ourselves are not perfect demonstrates to the voter that we are human too, and we will not judge them for having stigma. So if during tonight's presentation, you like anything that you heard, you were like, that doesn't land right. I don't know how I feel about that. It's okay to have different opinions, but maybe that's an example of stigma for you to work through. So I would love for us to see all of these tools put together in a really, really effective conversation. So this video comes from our deep canvassing program where volunteers use a script and a 0 to 10 scale to assess voters' opinions. The voter's name is Bonnie, who was canvassed by Amy. All the voters that we see in this training, in these videos, have given us permission to share these recordings in training scenarios. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video, and then afterwards we'll chat about it a little bit, or maybe take some reactions in the chat.
Every day. And so today we're asking folks on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 means you think women should have no access to abortion, and 10 means women should have full access to abortion, and in the middle are some restrictions. Where would you put yourself?
I don't believe in abortions.
So you would say like no access.
Yeah.
So like a 0 or?
Yes,
Yeah. So do you know anyone who's had an abortion?
Well, my son got a girl pregnant. They were both young, and her parents wanted her to have abortion, and we were totally against it because we said we would raise the baby for her if she had the baby, but her parents wouldn't let her. We were totally against it.
Yeah.
And they didn't want her to have a baby.
Yeah. Wow, what was that like for you and your son and your family?
Very upsetting.
Yeah.
Very upsetting.
What,
You guys can come in and sit down if you want to.
what was that experience like for that girl? What was her name? How old was she?
They're 18.
They were 18.
Yeah. She didn't really want to have the abortion, but her parents didn't want her to have the baby. So it was very upsetting for her also.
Oh wow, so she didn't get to make that decision herself either.
Right. Her parents made that decision for her.
How has that impacted her life?
She's doing pretty good now. I don't know. It kind of bothered her and my son because they were really hoping to have the child.
Yeah.
And it was just really hurtful to her that her parents made her make that decision. Yeah. And they're Christian people, and you would think with Christian people, they would kind of make that kind of decision.
You know, what had you and your son talked about abortion before that? Or?
My son went with her when she had it, even though, you know, it bothered him. He still went with her to give her support through the whole situation because it was, you know, their child. And he has children now. He has 4, and I believe she's got 1 or 2 now. Yeah, they're not together, but
Right.
yeah.
Did that impact his life at all? Or?
I think
Did you talk
at
about
first
his
we
feelings?
talked
Yeah.
about it and everything, and you know, try to help him through it just as much as trying to help her through it.
Yeah.
You know, But he's doing pretty good now. I mean, he's very happy. He's got children, and they,
were they using birth control or condoms or anything?
No.
Or
no,
had you talked to your son about that before?
No.
Or you just in your
we didn't
what
know
did you
we didn't know that they
they
were
were having sex?
right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we didn't know. So I mean, it's
Wow.
kind of like a shock because
Yeah.
you know we're
Yeah.
Catholic and they were Christian people. I mean, they went to Christian school. Her daughters went to Christian school, so I mean, it was like we didn't think they would do this, and
Wow.
it just happened. And
So
they come to us and oh wow,
oh, wow, yeah.
that was a big shocker. Like
Wow. So you had taught your son abstinence, and
yeah,
I think about how like women having an abortion has like evolved in my mind over time, and I think about actually a big thing I think about is teen pregnancy and how when I was in high school there was somebody who got pregnant and actually in like where I lived and in my and I'm Quaker. And so in my world, like my friends and I were like, why did she bring the child to term? Like, why didn't she have an abortion? And it was like that judgment and like the stigma of being a pregnant teenager.
well,
And
young teens shouldn't be going out and having babies, and I know there's a lot of them out there right now having babies, and if you don't have a job or a permanent home for them,
it's hard. I keep going back and thinking about your son and that girl. What was her name? Jen.
Yeah.
And how they weren't able to make the decision for themselves about what was the right answer for them. And that's what I think about when I think of my friend in high school. Like, she felt like that was the right decision for her, and I judged her for that. And it sounds like that Jen and your son would experience judgment for not supporting an abortion, for not having an abortion, and weren't able to control their own body.
Right.
It comes down to kind of that, that people are able to have control on to make whatever's the best
both were
decision for them.
18, right.
It's like
They should have been up to the two kids,
right.
than the parents stepping in and saying what's what, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, I think either way, right?
Right.
Like, I
Well,
mean,
we
if
all
they
should have sat down
Right.
and talked to them, you know, and let them. We all make a decision together.
Right. Do you think if Jen and your son had decided to have an abortion themselves, would you have
It would
supported?
have. Right. We would have supported.
that decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they both were still in their last year of school to graduate,
Right.
and then, you want your children to go through college too, so.
Like, what do you think the experience should be like for a woman who decides to have an abortion or in pregnancy? Like, if they've made that decision.
If they made that decision, then that should be their choice. But they should talk with the partner that helped make the child before she makes that decision.
I don't know. I've never been pregnant, I've never been pregnant.
Right.
And I used to like really think about what I would do in that situation, and and I realized like that there's no way for me to even guess what I would do.
Right.
Right.
It's a hard
Because
decision.
It's a very hard decision either way. It's like it's not an easy one, and it's and I think about my friends who have had abortion. Like my friend April, she was using the NuvaRing. I don't know. It's and it was at the health center. They were not storing it at the right temperature. The health center on her college campus, and so she thought she was doing everything, to prevent pregnancy, nope. And she got pregnant, and she was like the first in her family to be on their way to getting a college degree, and so for her and her life, she said, I can't afford this child right now. I can't take care of it, and so she wants children someday, but it's the responsible decision for her was really that having an abortion, and it wasn't easy. She thought about it, and
It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to really make. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that would love to have a child that can't have children, and then there's all these other ones that's so young to be having children. And it's just a really hard decision to make.
Absolutely. There are people that want to have children, and I think about like how much of a toll it must take to put your body through a pregnancy, and then have to give it up for adoption. It's like, actually only 2% of unplanned pregnancies are put up for adoption. Because it's so challenging.
It is, and it's a lot to put your body through, plus to put the child through after it's born, and
as we've been talking about this on the same scale from before, where 0 means you think women should have no access to abortion, and 10 means women should have full access to abortion. In the middle are some restrictions. Where would you put yourself?
I would put myself in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
What feels right for you?
About 5.
And why does that feel right?
Because I think that, people should discuss these things before decide to make a child. They need to make sure they financially can afford it, and make sure both partners are willing to take care of this child together. There should be several things that you need to make, because there's the expense and everything else.
And actually, I used to really think that like the people having abortions were people who weren't like protecting themselves, and and then I learned that 60% of women that have abortions already have one child and are in like their 30s. And it's like, and they are doing the responsible thing, that they can't afford another child. They're like, I don't want another one.
They are expensive.
Yeah, because they're expensive. And so I really think about that as well. It's like that's the average, is somebody who already has a child. Well, thank you so much for talking to us, Bonnie. And
sure, it's not a problem. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you too.
I love that. I mean, I have probably seen that video dozens of times. And I just love it every time I watch it. Couldn't be better. So I am going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. I would love to hear some reactions from you all. And I think that what we can do is, if you can raise your hand, using the raise hand feature, I believe our hosts will be able to unmute you, and then we can hear from folks. And we got somebody already. Thanks, Kathy. What do you think? Oh, Kathy, let's wait to be unmuted.
Everyone has the option to unmute themselves right now.
Oh, perfect. Kathy, go ahead and unmute yourself.
That's odd.
Okay, now I'm able.
There you go.
Hey.
All right. I kind of like the way when I thought the woman was going to be like, well, you can always give the baby up for adoption, and I like the way she was kind of like, well, that really is hard on the body, and it's really hard. I mean, it's kind of like, because I hear that argument all the time from, the people who are against abortion, who are anti-choice. And I like the way she addressed that. I think that's really important, because it is very, more women die in childbirth than they do having abortions. And I think that's a really important point to make. But and then also the other point I wish she had made is that when she was like, well, you should really discuss the abortion with the father of the child. Well, I don't agree with that. I mean, depending, of course, on the relationship, if it's somebody that you've been involved with for a long time, that's one thing. But if it's somebody that you don't, I mean, I don't know. And I'm not judging.
Yeah.
But you know, if it's somebody that you don't know that well, you're not going to give them that control, you know, because you don't know if they're going to like say, oh no, I want that child, you know, and then what do you do? So I don't, you know, and I don't know how the men feel, but I think that that's something that, you know, I would just have the abortion.
Yeah.
Now, and you know, one of the other things that I have not been pregnant, but I am old enough to remember before abortion was legalized, and the women in our neighborhood used to be terrified of getting pregnant. They would be terrified, and they would come over to our house, you know, and have coffee with my mother and be like, oh my God, he wants to have sex again. Oh my God, you know, because they were so afraid. They were using condoms. This was before the pill. I mean, I was very small, and my mother used to tell me that they were like so afraid of getting pregnant, you know, and so it was awful. And a lot of, especially younger women, don't know what it's like when that's not an option.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Kathy. And I think that I'm going to guess there's a lot of people in this room who have similar memories and similar stories. And I heard a story recently of somebody who lives in Texas. And because of Texas's current abortion laws, it's very, very difficult to find an abortion-friendly OBGYN right now. And they are basically using that same system. Before Roe, you knew somebody who provided abortions. It's the same right now with finding OBGYNs. And that's really tragic. I think that we're back in the similar position. So thank you for sharing that with us, Kathy. And I appreciate that you were noticing there's in our deep canvassing conversations, there's this delicate balance of sharing our stories with also some factoids and also some statistics and our values. And, you know, you sort of see that woven in together, and it's both what speaks to the head and what speaks to the heart that ultimately really moves people. So thanks for sharing that, Kathy. Mary, how about you? What's your reaction to the video? Mary Floden.
Can you unmute yourself, Mary, please?
Okay, hi. And I can start the video to, there we go. There, hi. So hi. So first of all, the last person who spoke, I'm sorry, I already lost track of who that was, about a man thinking that he has as much right as a woman to determine whether or not to have an abortion. I have an experience just recently having that conversation, and I can't remember now where I was, but it was an in-person conversation with a stranger, kind of a middle-aged man, and he was adamant that a man should have as much right, if not more, to decide whether or not the woman he had impregnated was going to have an abortion. And my response was, I got pretty triggered, and I was not able to have that cool, that calm grace that the person in the video had. So the video was wonderful to, you know, I got annoyed and the conversation ended, you know, without me making any progress in moving that individual. So seeing that video, my reaction was that it wasn't going anywhere. I mean, it just seemed so low key. The interviewer seemed to not really, she seemed kind of wishy-washy and not really going anywhere. And then I realized that by the end of the interview, she had moved this woman all the way from no, never, 0 to a 5, you know?
Yeah.
And it was remarkable. I just think it would be a long time for me to get to the point where I would have the forethought and the intelligence and the tools and the manipulative skills, I gotta say, to actually do that.
Mm.
Great to see it, but I don't know how I could manage that level of persuasive conversation.
Yeah, I hear you, Mary. Thank you for sharing that. And first of all, I would say Amy, who is the canvasser, was like one of the originators of this deep canvassing tactic on abortion. She's got a lot of practice, and so it definitely takes a long time. Also, in the canvassing context, in a phone conversation with your friend, whoever, if you're nervous about that conversation or if you get filled with emotions, that is so normal and that is so okay. And I think that what we need to do is sort of learn what are those stress responses, how are those our warning system for when something maybe crosses the line from uncomfortable to unsafe. But also, I think that the more we can kind of lean into some of those uncomfy feelings and move past them, the further that we'll go together. But I also think it's worth recognizing, like, for some people, like, this is not possible, and that's okay, as long as we find some way to contribute to this fight overall. I see a couple more folks have their hands up in reaction.
And we have a lot of questions too, so I don't know how we
Yeah,
want to
exactly.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to move us to questions because we got some really good questions in the chat. Deborah, I'm so sorry. Can I hear your reaction in the chat, please, Deborah? Because I really want to hear what you have to say. But I would love to take some questions. I think that Leanne is going to give me some questions. Awesome. What you
great.
got?
I have a couple of quick ones, and then Susan has a couple. From Kathy, how do you talk to someone who believes false facts and can't be logical?
Yeah, that is why I think that starting from a place of your real lived experiences and your values is going to be so much more impactful than talking about facts and statistics and logic. And, at the end of the day, like, I meet people through canvassing all the time who are just fully 0 out of 10, stuck in the mud. They're never going to change. They're fully indoctrinated in the anti-abortion movement. Those folks, it's okay if I don't change their mind. If the only thing that we do is have a friendly conversation about abortion, that's progress. Because otherwise we would have never had that conversation. But I think oftentimes this conversation can get really heady and it can get really like hypothetical when there are millions and millions of real live people today who have had abortions or who are going to have abortions in the future. And also people who are going to need abortions in the future who won't be able to access them. And so when somebody starts to get into that kind of far off, hypothetical, non-logical space, I try to ground them in like, look, the reality is real people need abortions, right? That's a great
And
question.
that would lead us to our next question, actually, because this is from Kathy. Do you know what percentage of abortions done in the US are for minority women? Isn't that a myth that they are mostly getting the abortions?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take that to mean like racial minorities. Yeah, it's actually true that Black women have a higher percentage of abortions than white women. Same thing with Latinx women. A lot of the times, anti-abortion folks will use those statistics to say, like, look, these people are putting themselves in irresponsible situations more, or even that the abortion movement is purposefully targeting Black communities to eliminate Black babies. And that is not true at all. When we think about why is it that that abortion is more prevalent in BIPOC communities, we think about things like lack of insurance coverage for folks. 60% of Black women live in states where the Hyde Amendment is still active. The Hyde Amendment is the federal law that makes it so that federal dollars cannot be spent on abortions, and that includes military people. That includes federally funded Medicaid. Some states have removed those rules for state funding. But anyways, you know, we can think about where are medical providers opening up clinics, in what communities. Maybe it's hard to get access to that. Maybe you've had a lot of racist interactions with doctors and you don't trust that system. And so you're not seeking preventative care. So when we think about these racial disparities, we should think about what are the causes behind them, not, you know, is a Black woman more likely to have an abortion? We should be thinking about the causes behind it.
Right. And that goes back to your slide about the
Mhm.
the systemic racism that is involved with not being able to access reproductive rights.
Yep.
Great.
And
Thank you.
I also want to add too that, like, I think a lot of the times when we're talking about race and abortion or race and medicine in general, like, we do often talk about disparities and but I think it's also important to know that, like, there are so many reasons people decide to have abortions and make these decisions. Like, people of all races and ethnicities are thinking about their lives, their futures, their dreams, their families. Like, people make the decision to have abortions out of love, you know, love for themselves and love for their families.
That's great. Thank you for
Yeah.
emphasizing that. Susan, do you want to ask
Yeah,
a couple
thanks a
questions?
lot. So I've asked you this before, Jillian, but I think it bears repeating. So Republican politicians claim that 12 to 15-week bans are mainstream, or they say that 12 weeks is ample time to have an abortion. So how do we counter that disinformation? It comes up in our conversations with voters.
Yeah. I will always say that there is no abortion ban that is reasonable to the person whose abortion it prevents. And that the human body does not operate on legal timelines. There's a lot of times people don't know that they're pregnant. For whatever reason, somebody might have a wonky menstrual cycle and they might not realize what's going on down there. But there's also, you know, we learned earlier about there are so many barriers to people getting abortions earlier in pregnancy. Their family member might have prevented them. They had to wait 12 to 15 weeks to raise the money to travel and get the abortion. They went to a crisis pregnancy center. Like, there's all kinds of reasons why abortion can be delayed and pushing it later and later. And so the shorter and shorter that window gets for being able to access abortion, the harder and harder it can be, you know?
And also that takes into account the increasing problem with women who are having miscarriages,
Right.
who can't get reproductive care.
Yeah.
And then there's one other question that came up from Kathy Thompson, and I thought this was really appropriate. She says, I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to young women friends about how important it is to vote for a politician to protect reproductive rights. And they tell me they don't plan to vote because, quote, my vote won't make a difference at all. And then also, you know, I've encountered with young women in blue states where, you know, they have the right to abortion, who feel they are completely safe. Abortion is really not motivating them to vote. You know, they have another issue, let's just say, that is the motivator. Can you talk to that?
Yeah. So unless your state has a state constitution that protects abortion, which not many of them do, more and more of them will after this election, but there is a good chance that your state's abortion laws can change with every single election. And even if you do have a constitutional amendment, those can even be undone, you know? And I think that we've talked about the myriad of the types of abortion bans that can happen. We've talked about the many, many ways that we continue to protect abortion. And so, and I often tell people, like, those state level elections, especially in primaries, especially, you know, even in municipal level elections, those things can be won or lost by literally like a dozen votes. 10 votes, you know? And so you getting out there and helping other people vote and voting yourself absolutely makes a difference. Like, even if you are not feeling so inspired by federal level races this year, a lot of people aren't, and that's okay. but it is your down ballot elections that are going to matter the most. And a lot of states have abortion rights ballot measures as well, so you get to vote directly on those issues. So just please get out there and vote.
Well, thank you, Jillian, so much. I think
Yeah.
it's a little after 7. Would you like to talk about your training that's coming up, for the more in-depth? I got the link ready, but and then we should probably wrap it up. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for reminding me to talk about this.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for this
Yeah, of
training.
course.
Yeah,
So, right, if you came to this training and you were intrigued by those little skills that we talked about, stories, values, non-judgmental listening, stigma, and you want to get some actual practice and some more in-depth skills, I would love for you to join us for Planned Parenthood Main Action Fund's 4-part virtual training, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. So it might be a little bit late for California, but we can make it work. So on Monday, the 8th of July, we will have Abortion 101. So we'll go even more in depth into the facts and figures that we went over earlier. On Wednesday, the 10th, we will talk about storytelling for reproductive rights advocacy. On Monday, the 15th, we are going to talk more about those tactics for conversations for culture change. And then on Wednesday, the 17th, that's when we put all of these things together and we put them into the deep canvassing context. So how we will teach you how to actually use our script and use these conversations to talk to voters. And then after that, we'll even have canvases for you to sign up for so you can put those skills to use. We would love for you to join us. We have folks join us from all over the country.
That's the beauty of Zoom, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can be where you are and do all the work. So thank you, Jillian, and thank you everybody who joined us today. It was great training.
And Berta, maybe we should mention that we will be sending the recording. People have asked for it in chat. Yeah, so and then is it 6 to 8 p.m. Pacific time as a question?
Oh, it's 6 to 8 Eastern time.
So that's
early for us. That's perfect.
Oh, that's early for y'all, right?
It's early, I know.
How does time work?
I know. We had that.
Okay.
Well, thanks all so much.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Go talk about
Bye.
abortion.
Yeah.
Thanks. See ya.